Now, up until the time I turned, let's say 24, 25-ish, I was very much living my life by the motto of it's a problem for future Joseph that I should only really be primarily concerned with today and fundamentally chasing pleasure to its greatest extent. Now, my life philosophy has somewhat changed since that life-changing event when I was around 23, 24, when I had a first episode psychosis. It was a drug-induced psychosis. I used to smoke a lot of cannabis and I got spiked by my dealer. They gave me something called Spice, which has other names like zombie green heroin, which, for lack of a better word, really messed me up. And out of that kind of, which I do take as a kind of dharmic, karmic, spiritual experience in my life, which allowed me to kind of look very critically about where I was placing certain assets in my life. And I recognized, if you can kind of tally them up in a table, that most of them I had thrown into this category as per my kind of life philosophy at that time. Live for today, don't disregard tomorrow, in pleasure. So most of my kind of attributes in that respect were primarily in pleasure. Now, there's two particular life philosophies I want to kind of discuss with you today. If you're around this kind of age group, or to be honest, even if you're younger, this will have incredible validity to you. I do think there's a far safer option, but I also believe there's an option whereby you can kind of leverage this innate survival mechanism that we all have in us. A simple, I suppose, prelude to that particular life philosophy is that we are far more sensitive, far more willing to act if we understand the notion of lack and survival, and what really motivates us is the feeling of potentially losing something as opposed to the feeling of gaining something, which is really, really interesting. And one of my friends, actually one of my good friends that lives very close to me, actually only 5 minutes away from me, he takes in this philosophy, but he works very well with it. And there's been some parts in my life where I have, quote unquote, set my own chair on fire in order to motivate me to stand up and actually start doing the things that I was, where I should have been fundamentally doing. But back to, I believe, what is a more safer, more logical, more rational route is to kind of live your life in your earlier years, maybe late teens, maybe early 20s, mid 20s, like you're a much older, a much more mature man. And in that way, you do see your whole time here, I guess you could say, is the easiest way to describe it, from a perspective of that holistic idea, that holistic viewpoint. In that, it's certainly not just about today, but also you need to be considering where else you need to be placing a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. And I kind of pride myself in this particular philosophy. I've always been told when I was very, very young that I'm kind of an old man living in a young person's body. I was always this individual who, whenever I got homework from school, now this sounds incredibly sad, but I would do it first thing and just get out of the way. In that, I would free up my time, free up my assets to be able to pursue more pleasurable things, as opposed to waste so much mental energy in anxiety that I wasn't actually, I hadn't finished my work and my obligations in respects to my studies. And in that way, I can kind of free up this mental energy to pursue things guilt-free. I think there's really something in that, because whenever my approach to work and my, let's say, relationship with pleasure and downtime is always a very tenuous one, because if I don't schedule in pleasure, which is, I believe, a very practical thing you should be doing, if especially you want to have pleasure without that kind of anxiety gnawing at you in the back of your mind, the best thing to do is to get your obligations done very, very early on, as soon as you get those obligations, as opposed to waiting for the last minute and, kind of scattering. I feel like I fully can't enjoy the pleasure or the, let's say, downtime of the moments that which we all need to have. It's not necessarily a bad thing or an immoral thing. It's completely dependent on your relationship with it and how much you allow it to spill out into other areas of your life. So back to my scheduling and the practical application I would have you take from this particular lecture is I have 2 calendars. Well, I have 3 calendars, actually. I'll just talk about my 2 calendars, which are particularly personal and particularly work orientated or business orientated. And I want to bring more attention to the personal calendar. Typically, people have a work calendar. Maybe they're booking out their calendar from 9 to 5. If you work, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, or perhaps you're freelance and you have various other commitments beyond those, let's say, typical hours. I will also schedule in, coffees with my friend. If I'm going to go watch a football game on the weekend, if I'm going to do, cold swim, if I'm going to play golf, if I'm going to do five-a-side football, if I'm eating lunch, if I'm having dinner, all these bits and pieces are so really important for me to actually block out in my calendar blocking, because I find it frees a lot of that decision making and mental neurosis when potentially you are having downtime and otherwise not fully invested and present in that downtime, as opposed to not schedule it in. Because I have been classified and told many times, especially by my family, especially by my sister, that I work too much, I do too much, and that I need to relax and spend a little bit more time relaxing and essentially just allowing my mind to create some space between, let's say, the videos that I'm making, the coaching clients that I'm coaching, the book that I'm writing, and other various products and projects that I'm working on at that time. And I know it might sound silly, but it actually gives you more time. This notion of time blocking and actually putting in to-do lists. A lot of people have a lot of adversity towards it because they're feeling like, then this means I'm obligated to do said thing. What you actually don't realize is part and parcel of that mental anxiety and neurosis and guilt diminishes when you actually do your obligations. You eat the frog, as that famous book would say, early on in the day, and you kind of free up the rest of your time to let yourself be more creative, let your mind wander without that shadow over you, that very heavy shadow over you, kind of on your back and telling you that, you shouldn't be enjoying yourself. You're not really worthy to enjoy these kinds of fruits of your labor because fundamentally you haven't done what you need to be doing to continue to live the life that you are living. So that is one practical habit that I would have you take and instill into your, if it's bi-weekly or bi-monthly, however, kind of on a macro level, you strategize and command yourself or command your armies, command your assets in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of resources over, the person that you are. I personally prefer a kind of bi-weekly or fortnightly view in that kind of perspective, and then you can get into the micro of actually doing the thing that you're doing, making it very, very attractive, maybe having some music, maybe having some nootropics like caffeine to help you, has always put me in a very favorable place in terms of how I perform to, I say, my highest level. In terms of the insight that I got when I got out of hospital after that particular psychotic break, I started to look a little bit more critically about the assets that I already have, because I think one of the temptations or the wrong way a lot of people think about starting to improve their lives, starting to have more jurisdiction and control over their lives is, what can I add? What can I bring in? What do I don't have? They're always focusing on the lack element. But I kind of took a different approach, and I would have you do the same in terms of looking at what you actually do have. And one of the things that I kind of had was the opportunity of a lot more financial freedom, because I was living at my father's home, and my father, fortunately, didn't make me pay any rent. I mean, I had to buy my own food and be fairly self-sufficient in that respect. But if you're not paying rent, that is a huge benefit, especially in the modern era. And I was taking all of that money and I was investing in equipment, I was investing in cameras, I was investing in books, I was investing in courses, I was investing in products and technology that would fundamentally allow myself to start building early momentum towards the kind of lifestyle that I wanted to live. And I think that is, I know it might sound like a simple thing, but when I look at especially my friends and people that I knew very intimately, not online, but kind of person to person in IRL, they were just really taking advantage of the fact that they were not having any obligations in terms of rent, in terms of bills, in terms of water, electricity, all these other bits and pieces. And they were taking that, however much it was. So, I mean, some of it can be fairly extensive. It can be £800 a month. It can be 1,000. and they were pouring that into, oh, this is my drinking money or my drugs money, or, you know, I can start to lease a car. And I'm so glad that I never, I mean, there was temptation there, don't get me wrong. There was certainly temptation there. I remember when I first had a salary job, I started immediately, I went on Mercedes website and I was like, right, let's lease an A-class. I'm so glad I didn't make the decision, because that is one of the most foolish financial decisions you can fundamentally make. We'll talk, I will segue in a moment into the other kind of life philosophy one can take in order to motivate one to improve one's life situation. But I just really believe in this philosophy of not looking at what you don't have and looking at what you have. Time is another one that I think perhaps we can delude ourselves into thinking that we don't have enough of. I fortunately put myself in a position where I developed a skill that allowed me to work freelance. And one of those skills that I have and still do have is a trainer and an educator. And what's really wonderful about this kind of occupation is that it allows you to kind of not be obligated to any kind of salary or 9 to 5. You can kind of pick and choose when you work, especially in the field that I'm in or was in, but I dabbling from time to time, which is healthcare, and working for an agency, kind of 0-hour contract, work whenever you want to work. Say you want to work only 2 days this week, fine, work 2 days. You want to work more, we'll give you the opportunity, as long as, again, you bring the equipment, you bring the skills, you have the knowledge, you're confident. And that, for me, when I kind of look, I do want to say perhaps it wasn't as intentional as I would like it to appear to you guys. Training and educating and teaching and coaching has always been something that I've been very, very passionate about. And kind of indirectly, I allowed myself to leverage that skill to free up a lot of my time, where I could work on my business, I could work on masculine theory, I could work on coaching, I could really have more control over my schedule. It does rely on a particular kind of temperament, because you believe, or you have to come to the agreement that everything is therefore on your shoulders. You book a Tuesday to do some educating and you get sick. Well, that ruins your reputation. Maybe they go, you're unreliable. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're sick. All that matters is, can you do the job, yes or no? And I've been always really fortunate in that respect, because I think my psychology and my temperament is favorable to that kind of occupation. I'm very, very consistent in that time. I rarely get sick, rarely get sick. And I always have a good, what would you say, repertoire of experience, of references, of previous work that kind of allowed me to put myself in a position where I was, top 10, top 5% of, what these agencies were looking for in terms of an educator, somebody who's very mature, somebody who's professional, somebody that's credible, that kind of comes in, walks, talks, and is congruent and consistent with everything that is on their CV or their references. And when you build that kind of relationship with somebody who can fundamentally give you work when it's preferable to you, that's one of the best arrangements that you can have. If you're working a 9 to 5, I think the world has moved in a direction now where they recognize that there needs to be a balance between work and, let's say, play or just lifestyle. You need to run some errands. You need to pick up the kids from school. These things are all negotiable with your employer. I would highly encourage you, if you have any aspirations to move away from the 9 to 5. This isn't a video bashing the 9 to 5, because I really believe you can have a very good, high quality of life with a 9 to 5. I'm just talking about how you can live a life that's more stress-free, and the kind of mentality and philosophy that you need to have that is going to put you favorably towards a lifestyle that is, more your speed. And in that way, it would be foolish not to recognize that most things in life are negotiable. Talk to your employer. If you can finish early, if you can finish later, maybe not finish later, but let's say you want to come into work earlier, or you want to come to work later and finish later. That's always something that I believe people are kind of scared, that they're kind of shoehorned into this area in believing. And maybe it's my time, because I'm a little bit older, and a lot of my occupational experience is pre-COVID and pre-home working. But now post all that, we recognize there's a lot of room for flexibility and greater quality of life there. And you'd be foolish not to leverage it. Now, I want to talk about another kind of philosophy. And these were just a couple of things, guys, that I think are really, really important lessons that I learned that allowed me to live the kind of life that I want to live. And I would have you really think and meditate on where are you fundamentally placing your assets in that respect, in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of energy. I mean, we didn't get to a place where we're talking about energy, but if I can give you a couple of lines on that, my highest priority is health. If I can't function well, I mean, take the previous example of me being very, very consistent with my health and never getting sick. That is something that I developed over time. I didn't have that, especially when I was a little bit younger. I used to get sick quite a bit. Now I got my health in check, and I allowed myself to be more reliant on the fact that I would be able to perform to a high level most days, every single day. And these helped me when I started to learn about things like fasting, when I started to learn more about nutrition, supplementation, about exercise, and having these things in my life as a non-negotiable. Meditation as well, you can talk about. We can talk about sexual energy, probably talk about sexual energy too much on this channel. But these are all things that I believe you can still have work on. I know your nutrition my nutrition isn't as good as it could be. My training has always been fairly good, but I mean, for you guys, can you honestly sit here and say that your exercise or training regime is optimized for your life? I mean, think about that. Not somebody else's life, your life. Like, if you need to perform at a very high level, you might need to recognize your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system isn't quite where you want it to be. If you're getting tired throughout the day, maybe your nutrition is, again, not complementing that. And I looked very, very critically at these things in my life, and I just decided to myself, right, you're not doing yourself any favors here. Invest. And one of the big things I did in this area was invest very heavily into good quality nutrition. I believe investment in good quality nutrition is one of the best return on investments that you can make. And I will go out and rarely look at the price. And I do look at the prices of some things, but it's gotten to the stage now where the price really isn't of great importance to me. It's more the nutritional value of the product that I'm having. So I will go in and, I'll go for the stuff that people may perceive to be, expensive. I'll go for the salmon. I'll go for the prawns. I'll go for the scallops. I'll go for, the high fatty cuts of, steak. All these things are very, very expensive. But when I recognize what I was eating pre-25, pre my breakdown, it was all meal deals, which was supplemented with rapeseed and inflammatory oils and all this. It was just not good. Lots of carbohydrates and pasta and rice and bread. Of course, there's a case in point, there's an argument for when these food groups might be of resource to you. But in terms of my cognitive function, I was eating like no fat whatsoever. And fat is one of the most important food groups for testosterone optimization, for brain health. And we talk about fasting as well, and the time that it frees up and the energy that it frees up. And also, if you're not buying breakfast, more financial, assets that you can put elsewhere. It was really amazing to me, the integration of fasting and how dramatically that kind of changed my energy, my finances. I mean, really all of them. And that's free. It costs nothing to just control the hour or the window in which you're consuming food. Now, the last one I did want to touch on, guys, because I feel like this video is fairly self-explanatory in what I'm trying to achieve here. And I think most of you would agree that self-improvement is really just looking at what you have and being more intentional and being more careful about where you're placing it. But there is another side which leverages this innate survival mechanism that we have. And I mentioned this phrase, setting your chair on fire or burning all the boats. And it's this idea that human beings are far more motivated to take action when there's a fear of loss as opposed to a fear of gain. So consciously and intentionally putting yourselves in situations which make you uncomfortable. And I don't mean in a physical sense. I mean maybe in a mental and an emotional sense. You are far more motivated to find an extra £100 or $100 at the end of the month to pay your rent, otherwise they're going to kick you out. Then, if you want, I don't know, if you want to buy more supplements, or if you want to buy a piece of software equipment, or you want to hire somebody, right? It's far more compelling to leverage those innate survival mechanisms. And one of my friends, as per my last piece of advice, has leased a car, a very expensive car, it's a very nice car, it's a nice BMW. But he's put himself in a situation where he has to perform, otherwise they take his car away. And he's got a kid, he's got a girlfriend, and he has obligations in that way. He owns a cold email marketing agency, and he has to perform. You know, there are days where, you know, he doesn't have a safety net to go, well, it's okay if, you know, this month doesn't work out or next month doesn't work out because I've got the next 6 months covered. No, he's kind of living in that survival. I don't know intimately his finances, but this is the kind of pitch he gave to me, is that if he recognizes that he needs to make this sum of money by this time, otherwise his lifestyle, his survival, his food, his water is going to be effective, he's forced to perform. Now, there have been some parts in my life where I've leveraged this kind of idea, when I've paid for expensive coaches, because it, again, forces you to perform. You give somebody a lot of money, you pay attention. You know, I've paid coaches in the 4 figures, in the 5 figures, and you're there, you know, 10 minutes before the call, you're there with a pen and a notepad, you're ready to go. You're listening to everything, you're going through all the actions that they set you, because that fear of loss, that fear of not having a return on investment is terrifying. You don't want to lose that investment. You have to perform. You are forced to perform. It is something that I don't advocate, but it would be naive of me not to give you that information, because when you recognize this is an innate skill that we all have. I mean, the idea of fasting is actually predicated on the idea that you're dying slowly. Like, if you don't eat food, you are dying, right? If you don't eat for, you know, there's some studies of people going 40 days without food, but the upregulation in muscle sparing effect, in cognitive function, is the body's attempt to force you to find food. And I always make the analogy in semen retention or sexual energy mastery, conservation of the sexual force. If you're not reproducing, the body has a similar effect. If it recognizes, oh, Joseph isn't reproducing, let's force him to reproduce by upregulating his testosterone, upregulating his energy, making him less sensitive towards rejection. A lot of the benefits in SR are predicated on survival mechanisms. The body is very intelligent. It's not going to roll over and die. If you put it in a corner, it will fight tooth and nail, the hardest it's ever fought to survive. But the prospect of gain is not motivating in any kind of equal manner to that of the prospect of loss. So it's a really interesting concept that you can leverage. Hey, maybe you put yourself in I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and I said, you know, he wants to move from his current flat to a more expensive flat, but he's like, I don't know if I can, you know, make ends meet. I was like, well, have you considered that if you do get that flat, which is a little bit more expensive, that gets you a little bit nervous, that it forces you to be the man you need to be. It forces you to make the money you need to be to live. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting perspective to look at these kinds of things. And, you know, it's not without an element of maturity. You understand where this comes from to put yourselves in these positions. Maybe some people are unconscious of doing that. I mean, I'm not saying chase pleasure needlessly. I'm just saying allow yourself to feel that fear, because fear is actually, if you can put yourself in a position to experience fear in the right way, fear can actually be a very, very compelling emotion. It really can force you to fight. I'm thinking there's I did a community post on this that some of you didn't like. There's a really interesting quote in The Dark Knight Rises, the last of the Batman trilogy from Christopher Nolan. And one of the blind inmates talking to Bruce Wayne, what's his name? What's the actor's name? Christian Bale's character, had a mind fart there. He says, you know, he's trying to climb out of this hole, and he's saying, do it without the rope. You're trying to climb out of this horrible situation with a safety net. He goes, how can you fight harder than possible, for longer than possible, without the most powerful mechanism your body has to offer you, which is the fear of dying. the fear of losing, and how crushing that experience will be. You put yourself again backed up into a corner, you will find the adrenaline, you will find a force, that survival instinct that you will never be able to grab and leverage when you're comfortable. And that's where the idea comes from, going into discomfort, going into cold showers, discomfort, survival, right? Adrenaline up, heart rate up, fight, survive, grow. That's the idea behind this. So gentlemen, I'm interested to know which one of these life philosophies you kind of subscribe to. And if you got that second one, because sometimes it can be hard for people to grasp that concept. Anyway, these aren't theories, they're facts. Speak soon.